Hi everyone, welcome along to Product Circle. Hope you're all doing well, staying safe, staying warm. I wonder whereabouts is everyone based tonight? I'm in London and it's freezing, so hopefully it's a little bit warmer where you are. But yeah, welcome to the event. So this is actually the third event that we've done this week. We did a React.js focused event on Tuesday, did a UX event last night, and tonight is obviously the data and agile product management and ownership focused event. So it's the one with the most complicated name, but also the best content, I find, as well. So really good to see everyone here. So the event, as you'll probably be able to tell from my ramblings, is live. So after each of the presentations that we've got tonight, we will be able to have a Q&A with each of the presenters. So if you have any questions or anything like that, then feel free to drop them down in the comments section, and we'll be able to ask those questions at the end of each presentation, and keep the conversation going on. If you are watching this event in your own convenience, not live, then unlucky, you can't ask your questions, but feel free to send me a message or something like that on LinkedIn, and we'll try and get as many of the answers and the conversation continuing as well. So this is our Christmas special event, so it's the last event of the year, so we're doing things slightly differently. So on top of having the two awesome presentations that we've got from Marco and Yannis. Marco's the founder of SimpLabs, which I'm sure he'll go into in a lot more detail very soon. And Yannis works at Medi-Data. So I'm sure you'll get very good insights into both of those businesses very, very soon. But after those presentations and after the Q&As and everything like that, we have been raising money over the past 3 days for a Movember charity. I'm not sure if you can see, but I've got a very poor excuse for a moustache that has been going on for a bit longer than November. To try and raise a little bit of money and keep people smiling throughout what's a pretty difficult time, and obviously to raise money for quite a good cause. We've done quite well so far. We've raised about £800, and hoping just to kind of continue that for tonight as well. So we will be running a raffle if we can get enough donations coming through. So I'll share the Eventbrite link, which is just a small donation of your choosing, gives you entry into the raffle. We've had a couple of donations so far, but in order to actually do the raffle, we probably need a few more donations. So throughout the event, if you do have time just to donate whatever you can, it goes towards a very good cause, and we'll draw the prizes at the end of the event, which include, I know that Medi-Data have contributed some swag in their terms, which is lots of laptop bags and things like that, are all branded and very cool. We've got Simply Business have done something quite similar where they've got like hoodies. We've also got people giving up their time, so we've got personal branding sessions. I know that Ada, the product lead from Just Eat, has graciously given up some of her time to do a one-on-one kind of mock interview with someone. So it's pretty cool to get someone of that caliber to be able to go through a kind of mock interview with you. Also, if you win these prizes and you don't want them, you can contribute them to something else, give it in a Secret Santa or something to someone. So entirely up to you. Then after all of that's done, we can get really Christmassy and sit down with some mulled wine. If you haven't got any already, I should probably get onto that really and get some mulled wine. But we're going to be watching a Christmas movie. So we're doing something through the we're going to be doing something through what's called a Netflix party. So you need to have a Netflix login. Please let me know if you don't have a Netflix login, because I'm not sure how you've made it through lockdown. You must have more friends than I have to speak to. But if you can join via the link that we'll put in the comments section at the very, very, very end of the presentation, then we can join. We're going to be watching a Christmas movie called Jingle, Jangle, which is quite a new one. I haven't seen it, but I'll definitely be watching it tonight. Just put the feet up, get into the Christmas spirit. Last event of the year, hopefully some really good content, raise a bit of money at the same time, and then finish it all off with a Christmas movie. Also, the good thing about that Netflix party as well is everyone's watching it at the same time, So you can actually like comment, pretty similar to this. You can put a note in there saying how cheesy and rubbish these songs are probably, but that's what it's all about really. So hopefully it'll be a really good evening. I'm really glad to see you all here, and yeah, if you need anything from me, I'll be in the comments section. Otherwise, I'll probably just hand over to Marco, our first speaker of the evening.
Hey everyone, nice to be here, even if here is actually Munich, Germany, and I'm only joining you remotely as everybody this year. My talk is called The 3 Pillars of Effective Digital Product Development. And I want to talk about how avoiding bad practices in digital product development and adapting better ones in 3 main areas will improve quality, velocity, predictability, and your team's motivation. Because the reality is that many projects and teams fail, at least every now and then. And I'm sure everyone here has experienced that for themselves. Would be nice to do a quick show of hands, but obviously like in the setup we can't, but next year we can again, hopefully. And failure comes in many forms. Like first, missing time and budget constraints is probably the most common kind of failure, where teams miss deadlines or spend more money on projects than was planned, or in the worst case, they run out of money midway, even before shipping anything. Also, shipping doesn't necessarily mean everyone is happy. Maybe users do not want what was delivered, as it is not, as it addresses not a problem that they actually have, or they just don't understand how to use what was delivered because it has a poor quality, poor usability, or quality is so bad that they can't actually use it because it breaks all the time. There's also organizational failure, where you could say teams and projects get stuck on a structural level, and there's no way to accelerate velocity or improve quality because you can't grow the team really, right? Or growing the team doesn't lead to more output. And then that often leads to people becoming demotivated, which can cause fluctuation among the team, which causes more demotivation, which causes more fluctuation and so on. And for all these problem areas, I don't say I have a magic spell that it makes all problems go away forever, but I do have some insights and advice I'll share in this talk. Most reasons for failure, as well as the respective solutions, lie in 3 main areas. First, planning and preparation, where many teams approach that with sort of the wrong level of detail for the different scopes they're dealing with in a project, resulting in over planning on a macro level and then under preparation on a micro level, which leads to unrealistic plans in the beginning and then even problems delivering on those plans. Second is process and collaboration. Many organizations still apply top-down management in an effort to ensure that teams deliver. The idea is that if you're not applying a bit of pressure and if you're not on people's back, they won't maybe don't do anything and you will not get any results. In our experience, that's almost always more harmful than it does good. And then last, infrastructure and practices, which is something that is very often overlooked. We see a lot of teams that are given a single hammer and then asked to build a skyscraper with that. And of course, that doesn't work. And we look at these 3 areas one by one. However, given I have relatively little time here, I'll be focusing on the last pillar and only touch on the first 2 relatively briefly, sharing only sort of the key points. So first, planning and preparation. These are important to get right tasks and they're easy to get wrong. But getting those wrong is particularly hurtful or harmful because the planning preparation step sort of is where you raise expectations. And then you disappoint them if what you planned or prepared fails. And the main problem here in our experience is over-planning, where teams project what they will be doing or what they will deliver in too much detail too far in the future, right? While in reality, nobody can know any of that. It's all just made up, basically. When I say in 6 months, we deliver feature A, B, C, and then another 6 months later, we deliver feature D and E, It is often done in an effort to look extremely productive or engaged or ambitious. Ambitious is a term you will hear a lot in that context. But in reality, ambitious is sort of just cipher for unrealistic and thus essentially irrelevant. At the same time, while making these ambitious plans, teams would sort of under-prepare the work at a smaller scale, or sort of on a lower level of scope, so that they constantly start working on seemingly small tasks and then only understand the real nature of these tasks once the work has already started. And that real nature is typically that this task is bigger than it appears in first glance, leading to all kinds of inefficiencies, right? Where things get delayed and so on. So the answer to all that is generally to treat each scope you're dealing with at the appropriate level of detail, going from little level of detail to a high level of detail while the scope gets smaller. The entire project is too big of a scope to do anything with, really. Typically, you will only know what sort of the scope of all of your project was in hindsight when you've done it. So this is essentially irrelevant and nothing you need to care about. Like no 2-year plans, whatever. Nobody knows what you will end up with after 2 years. We recommend moving in 6-week steps, which we call increments, where each increment is a coherent set of functionality that has value for users and that it can ideally give to users to receive feedback. You can think of sort of the first increment being like the MVP maybe, or maybe like you need 2 or 3 increments to get to like something that you can release as a public MVP, and then sort of every 6-week increment sort of improves that, adds a new feature set and so on. And that makes the scope that you're dealing with much smaller, and you can plan and prepare that at an intermediate level of detail with relative confidence. And then the individual work items are the smaller scopes you're dealing with. It's usually like only like a day or a few days worth of work maybe. And here you go into as much detail as you can. And that's what many teams don't do. Like you really, before starting to work on something, you want to uncover like all of the uncertainties and any potential risks and challenges up front so that you really understand what you will do before doing it to prevent running into problems then. And the next pillar I want to mention relatively briefly only is process and collaboration. The projects that we all work on are team efforts, of course. So the practices and processes around communication and collaboration among the team are essential for a project's success. And only teams that work together well will be able to achieve the best results. All project teams have a number of members with different priorities, different perspectives, and so on. Like you have the product expert, the salesperson, the engineers, the marketers, the designers, the accountant, and so on. However, many projects are really driven mostly by one of these team members only, or for the most part. If you're doing Scrum, for example, that even sort of demands that, right? When it says that the user's perspective is the only thing that counts. And while that makes sense in theory, in reality, this usually leads to product managers dictating priorities, focusing on delivering features fast, which results in building a debt on all other fronts and degrading all other team members to mere executors of the PM's plan. Like you cannot pretend when building software that like the end user's perspective is the only thing that matters. Like you're still dealing with something that is it's made of code. It has like sort of design needs to be considered beyond of sort of what the user might tell you they want. You cannot negate all that. It sounds good in theory, but it doesn't work. So we are advising against that, and instead for truly self-organized teams with no dedicated management role or no single contributor dictating everything, dictating direction and so on. Instead, you want to have direct communication and collaboration between all team members because that fosters appreciation for each other's perspectives. It ensures all team members' motivations and needs are considered, so you prevent sort of building up debt or focusing focusing on debt too much and neglecting features and so on. And it results in a feeling of shared ownership for the project among the team, which is critically important for long-term team motivation. And of course, this communication and collaboration won't look like this, right? People in a meeting room with Post-its on the wall. Admittedly, nothing says we're modern, we're agile, we have a bit of the startup vibe more than this picture. But while this is great for marketing brochures or landing pages, maybe, it is not a reasonable approach to running software projects anymore, of course. In the year of the pandemic, it seems unnecessary to say, but the days of the office, at least for teams that build digital products, are over. They were over before the coronavirus and are definitely over now. People are happier, more focused, and more productive when they get to choose where they work. And forcing everyone to work from the same office is just a competitive disadvantage. And it will be even more so after the pandemic, when people don't want to go back to old working styles, right? After they have seen how well things work remotely. Our company, SimpLabs, has been full remote since we were founded, and so have many of our clients and like many other successful companies, right? So this is an image showing the past, right? The future is people being anywhere and everything being in cloud-based tools. But this is not about sort of going remote, but about the three pillars. So we have talked about planning preparation. We have talked briefly about process and collaboration. So now I want to go to the third pillar, the one we'll be focusing on in this talk, which is infrastructure and practices. Teams need to be given the right tools to deliver the best work in the most effective way. And the goal must be to provide them with a highly integrated and automated system that allows them to deliver like a steady stream of value. Elon Musk refers to Tesla's gigafactories as the machines that build the machines. And this works the same way for software projects. You need a well-running machine, a proper factory to build the software. And that doesn't mean you eliminate all humans and the software like sort of writes itself, but the factory that the team operates allows them to excel. However, in our experience, as I said before, this is very often overlooked. We see many teams operating like in mediocre environments, fighting these environments rather than being supported by them. And of course, the infrastructure and practices you need for software teams doesn't look like the factory on the slide here. When building cars, you're dealing with steel and so on, while we're eventually dealing with source code. That's basically what we transform, like everything that sort of is created before the source code is written into eventually, right? That's sort of the currency, the matter that like our products are made of. Yeah, we're talking about digital product development here, and you'll end up with a lot of code and usually several people contributing to that code base. So the question is, what are the practices and the infrastructure that enable teams to efficiently evolve code bases over time as projects progress? And I don't want to go into technical details here, just like give more sort of a high level overview sort of for how an efficient pipeline would look. Of course, the most essential thing that you need is version control, but it's also not just it's not just about setting up a Git repository or like having an account on GitHub and then sort of like pointing developers at that. It's also about like applying the proper strategies when using that. And by that, I mean, first and foremost, evolving code bases in small isolated steps following a single strategy. And don't worry, I'm not going to dive deep into technical details and give an engineering talk. The idea here is that you start with a main branch and create a feature branch based on that for the work item you're working on. That's basically sort of the feature branch pull request workflow that was established basically by GitHub like years ago already. And the changes in those feature branches are then reviewed, tested, and so on, which might also lead to subsequent changes. Like you have like a bit of iterative thing going on there. And we'll talk about testing more later, but the manual review by a peer is essential as well here. This is for two reasons. First, quality assurance. Everyone makes mistakes, becomes sloppy under pressure and so on. And while most problems should be detected by test, you'll never find everything like that. A second pair of eyes is essential to ensure high quality. And here we're talking mainly about aspects of quality other than sort of functional correctness. other than whether something works as expected. It's more about like maintainability. Will like my teammates be able to understand and change that code? Will I be able to understand and change that code in the future, and so on? And the second aspect why reviews are critical is for know-how sharing. The worst case scenario is you have a code base or parts of a code base that is only understood by one engineer, and then that engineer leaves the company or like gets the coronavirus or whatever. Nobody else is left who knows that code, and like nobody will be able to make any changes. And this, it sounds like something that's a bit like hypothetical and doesn't happen in reality, but I've seen it happen over and over and over again, where like companies did not have a peer review process, or people were sort of overly defensive about that part of the code base, which is also like bad, of course. So once reviews and tests pass, the changes merge back. And there are three essential points to this approach here. The branch is kept small and focused around one thing only. It gets a small unit of work. Quality and correctness is ensured before the branch is merged back and not afterwards. And there's only the master branch and the feature branch, and that's all. Many teams apply like very sophisticated and complex strategies involving like several branches and rules when which branch can be merged in which other branch and so on. But I have never seen those work in reality. Like people get confused, like people accidentally merge like between the wrong branches or whatever, and then sort of your process doesn't work anymore. In reality, simplicity is the only thing that leads to long-term success, and it doesn't get simpler than like main branch and feature branch. And of course, collaborating on code is only made possible with a collaboration platform. Really, that's like why you use GitHub, GitLab, and so on. That's pretty much widely understood now. That is how we work with code, but there's also other kinds of sources, of course, which are design sources. And while there's only one kind of code tree, there's two different kinds of design sources. First, you have exploratory design, which is used for like visualizing concepts and brainstorming ideas in meetings. And these design sources are more like one-off in nature and used to guide communications or discussions or enable decisions. They are usually not evolved so much over time, really. So there's relatively little long-term collaboration happening around these. What's maintained and evolved over time is like what I would call the definitive design, which is concrete and detailed UI design for an application, screens and elements. That kind of design should be organized and evolved as a collection of reusable components usually. And those components then are assembled into larger components and screens of the application, so that as more of the UI is developed, the bigger the component library will grow, and the more of the UI will be based on components in it, which reduces the work needed for every new part of the UI and ensures consistency across the application. The end goal here is to eventually create a design system, which is a set of interconnected patterns and shared practices that serve the purpose of a digital product. In that sense, it goes beyond of what, for example, a component library does, and also takes things like icons, colors, typography, and so on into account as well. It's also more valuable than having individual designs for each screen of the application that are done independently of each other over time. And every time there's a new screen, since the design system builds on reusable components, so that new screens will be constructed based on those. And essentially, that's how we've written software for quite some time, by extracting individual reusable modules in the source code and then reusing those when we build new screens and features. And design systems bring that same approach to design, basically. And there's more to learn for design from engineering. We can also apply the same workflow that we talked about for source code. And just as we evolve a code base, one small isolated change set at a time, we can do the same thing for design sources, starting with a central authoritative mainline again, and creating an isolated change set based on that. which is then reviewed and merged back. And the benefits are the same as for working on source code. And while you can use the same version control system you're using for an application source code, there's a few specialized systems that make that a bit nicer for design sources as well. Obviously, an important part in both of these workflows is the testing step that happens before something is being merged back. In any software project, the only way to ensure what you do actually works is to test. And if you don't test, you will not know whether what you did works or not. And thus you will have to assume it doesn't. Although testing is of the absolute essence, it is surprising how often it is not done properly or not at all, which leads to the same problems every single time, degrading quality and teams lacking the confidence to move at an even intermediate pace, right? It always seems like skipping tests makes you faster, but that's only for like a very short period of time, like maybe for a few days. Okay, it works like that, right? Skipping tests will slow you down, not only eventually, but like very soon. And it's not just important to test though, it's also important to do it right, which mainly means three things. Manual testing is essentially the same as node testing. Of course, you can click through things, even following elaborate testing protocols, but manual testing is slow, expensive, and unreliable. It can be an addition to automated testing, but never a replacement. So automated testing is an absolute must. In fact, we don't work on projects that don't have automated tests or where we cannot add them in case they're missing. Second, tests need to run for every change and give immediate feedback. That is what CI means, like continuous integration. Someone makes a change to the code in Git, a test run is triggered on the CI server automatically, and immediate feedback is given to the author of the respective change, so they know what change broke which test and can act on that right away. And last, functional correctness is only one aspect. An app can work correctly but still be visually broken. And you want to test for these things as well. There's great tools for functional regression testing available. Not everything can be tested automatically though. We said automation is king, but sometimes it doesn't work. Some things require sort of manual approval from other stakeholders. For example, to ensure there was no misunderstanding about how a particular feature was supposed to work. And that approval, of course, should happen before the respective change is merged back and becomes part of your main branch. And that kind of approval workflow is enabled by previous system. The previous system allows changes to an application to be shared with other stakeholders before the respective branches merge back in version control. It is a system that's spun up on demand based on the respective branch so that other stakeholders can access it and interact with it just like the real system. And that way they can preview changes and approve them or ask for additional modifications before those changes are applied back. Because once any change is applied back, like merged back, what you want to happen is that change being released to production automatically and immediately. In the past, releasing updates to applications was a bigger task. People would have release dates where everyone was rushing to get their work in until the deadline. And then there were huge releases, often with dozens or hundreds of changes at the same time. And when something broke, nobody had any idea what particular one of those changes caused the problem. And these setups mainly existed for a lack of automation around development, testing, previewing, and releasing. The infrastructure I'm describing here was very hard to set up only a few years ago. That is not the case anymore. Nobody should be doing huge scheduled releases anymore. You want to release a steady stream of lots of small changes, all tested and approved and automatically released like this. However, there's one important thing left. The best testing setup will only be able to prove things work on the test system, but production can be different. Users behave in weird ways, external dependencies are out of your control, and so on. So just assuming everything in fact works as intended or as tested in production is risky. And not a risk you want to take usually, as it's you're potentially paying users who run into these bugs then. You need to know things work in production. So there's three essential things to do if errors occur in production, you need to be aware. There's nothing worse than learning your system is broken through your users when they tell you. Ideally, you want to know there's a problem and fix it before they even realize. So a tracking or reporting tool that makes the development team aware of errors is absolutely critical. Also, no errors being reported in that tool can also be because nobody is using a particular part of the system you have built. Understanding whether or how people use the system is critical for understanding whether what you build is even relevant to them, of course. So you need to analyze users' behaviors, which, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean giving up on privacy and spying on everyone's private data. There's plenty of way to do that in non-invasive ways, like fully GDPR compliant and so on. Last, releasing everything right away does also not mean it needs to be released to all of your users all at once. Sometimes you might not be sure whether users like a functional or visual change. So you can roll it out to part of the users only and see how they react, like doing an A/B test, right? Sometimes you might also not be sure whether the system can handle the load of a new feature. So you can roll out the feature incrementally to like a growing share of your users and keep an eye on the servers along the way, like using feature flag mechanisms and rolling releases and so on. And now, with all of these practices and infrastructure that we talked about in place, you'll reach the ultimate goal that all digital product development teams must aim for. And that is a highly integrated and highly automated pipeline that allows the team to consistently and sustainably deliver a steady stream of value. It starts with a work item from the iteration, from the team's current iteration. And that work item has been well prepared and is very unlikely to lead to any unforeseen challenges or blockers, as explained briefly earlier, right? Where when you prepare work on sort of the small scale of an individual work item, you want to make sure understand at a detailed level what changes you will be making to the application sort of to complete the work item. Then the next step is the designer makes the necessary design changes in a branch. And in that branch, they link to the work item, of course, and the work item links back to their branch. So you have all of the context that you need at either side of this process at all times. The changes are then reviewed and merged back, and the engineer makes the necessary code changes in a branch as well, which is also interlinked with the respective work item, of course, and probably also the respective design change there. And the changes are automatically tested and potentially manually approved by other stakeholders on a previous system. And then once the changes are merged back, the status of the respective work item, of course, and the work item tracking system is updated automatically, and the changes are auto-released to the production system. And the production systems then observe constantly for any problems that might still be occurring there. And that's the same for every task. And of course, teams will be pushing multiple tasks through this pipeline in parallel at any time. And this kind of pipeline enables teams to constantly, consistently, and sustainably deliver a steady stream of product value to a company's users with confidence and minimized overhead. And I want to repeat this to be entirely clear. This is not something that developers or designers would want to have the same way they would want to have stand-up desks or nicer chairs. Any digital product development team that is not supported by pipeline like this is not operating at their full capacity and will not be able to deliver the same product value to a company's users for the time and money invested as a team that is supported by such a pipeline. And that is all I have. Thanks. I'll be around to answer questions, of course. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Marco. That was a really, really good presentation. I hope you found it easy enough to do in the remote world that we now live in.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's used to doing everything remote, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Cool. And welcome, Yanni. It's nice to have you here. Thanks for taking the time out of your diary to be with us this evening. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm all right. All things considered.
Exactly. Good. So I think we've got a couple of questions that have come through from the audience. So guys, feel free to keep asking questions, and then we'll put those to Marco as well. But Yanni, I think you had a question first off. Is that right?
Yeah, really interesting talk, by the way, Marco. So that chart that you showed towards the beginning of your talk resonated quite a lot, right? So when we're in that planning stage, there's a very, very high degree of uncertainty. So my question is, do you have any tips on how to address that uncertainty? Because, 9 out of 10 times we find ourselves forcing our engineers to estimate based on very, very little detail and information. And then guess what? We find out that scope is probably double the initial estimate. So do you have any tips on how to address that uncertainty in the beginning?
Yeah, so I would say, you can never get rid of all uncertainty, so at least not on a bigger scope. So the solution is always to make the scope as small as possible, right? If you I don't know, plan to build like a system for booking train tickets, like we did that with a client of ours. That's a huge scope, right? Website and then connection to carriers, whatever. So that's not a scope anyone can estimate, of course. But like maybe you can find sort of like a minimum version of that, like an MVP or so that you can build in 6 weeks, right? That is something that you can deal with. And then even sort of if there's still uncertainty, like maybe you're 10% off with an estimate, but it doesn't hurt that much, right? Also, the other thing that I didn't go into too much detail because of lack of time is that's basically what I would call the difference between planning and preparation. Like planning is sort of more like what goal do we want to reach in the end, right? And then preparation I would see as something you do on a like work item level, right? Where you're like, your plan would sort of result in sort of a vision, right? So like not very detailed. And then what you do is when you work in iterations, so you work like week by week or bi-weekly or whatever, and then you break sort of the journey from where you are to where you want to be down into work items. And those should ideally only be like 1 to 2 days of work, right? And then on that level with that scope, it's relatively easy to prepare that in very much detail to really think like what change do I need to make to my code base? What new UI elements do I need to introduce where and so on? And if you prepare at that scope thoroughly, you're very likely to like uncover all of these things that you couldn't foresee sort of when you were looking at the big picture in the beginning, right? Yeah, so that's the mechanism, basically keeping sort of the overall scope for what you plan short, like we say, like ideally 6 weeks or so, and then move in iterations, break that sort of scope down into work items and prepare them thoroughly. And it's like it's easily worth like spending like 1-2 days or so when you're working like weekly or bi-weekly iterations, preparing the work you want to do. Like maybe one person does the preparation for 1-2 days or so, and then you end up with work items that are really well understood and like unlikely to lead to exactly the situation you're describing, where it takes like double the amount of time or 3 times the amount of time because you haven't realized you need to add like an additional API for something or whatever.
That makes sense. Thanks a lot.
Perfect. Cool. So I think we've got a couple of questions from the audience now. So it's nice to see a bit of the Product Circle alumni here this evening. So nice to see you, Ada. So Ada's asked a question for you. So in your experience, how do you know if you are over planning or under planning? Is it easier to notice in hindsight, but not during the project?
I mean, yeah, sure. In hindsight, it's always easy to see, right? But that's not really what you want, right? Because sort of like if you realize in hindsight, that means you like realized you made a mistake sort of, but that's like, maybe that's like a valuable learning for next time. But I mean, I would say the classic example of over planning is like the classic like 500-page specification, also where you sort of describe like a big system and then handle all the edge cases. Like if a user is logged in but is only like under 18 or whatever, then they should see a particular banner, like stuff like that. Right? I would say a classic example of under planning is I know, like using that example from previously again, where I say I want to build a system for booking train tickets. Then it's like you just say that to the development team and they just go, right, without even thinking. So they're basically skipping the entire preparation step, sort of where they break that down into like small steps, think about what that actually means and so on. And like, while those are the extremes, you would still see both of those things in reality, like more the latter, more sort of the lack of preparation and less like the big specifications. It's really something that like very few teams do anymore, of course. I mean, yeah, there's no good rule sort of where I can say, if you do this, like you will never like over plan or under prepare. So I mean, the best thing you can do is sort of to plan for like a medium scope, medium like time, which would be those 6 weeks. And by the way, if anyone has read the book Shape Up by Basecamp, that's very similar sort of to what we describe, and that's very interesting. So basically, they say like they have a 2-week thing, but sort of the main idea is like you should go in 6-week steps, because that's something you can deal with. You would still miss a few things, but it's something that you can deal with and like estimate sort of, or sort of project what you will be able to do, or whether you will be able to reach a particular goal in that time relatively reasonably. And then sort of before actually doing the work, then breaking sort of that plan down into like 1 to 2 day work items, sort of that you can then like really thoroughly prepare, and you have a high likelihood sort of to uncover all these uncertainties, or at least be aware of them before you start the work. That's also like more valuable than just like running into unforeseen problems when the work has already started.
Yeah, for sure. Cool, great, thank you. So final question that we've got for you, and then you're off the hook, is from Marta. So Marta, another Product Circle X speaker. So it's nice to see you here. So she says, question for Marco: what do you think is the ideal blend of feature building and infrastructure maintenance or improvement for development teams?
I want to say, in general, it depends on sort of the state and quality of the system you have, right? I mean, if sort of that's in relatively bad shape already, and you can sort of barely move, then you should probably be spending like a lot of time in infrastructure and refactorings and so on. Like one very important thing that I think many teams sort of don't really openly communicate it. Like, I mean, that's I think you cannot call that like improvements for developers, right? Those sort of refactorings or whatever, because it's not like, sometimes it might be like developers want something, so their life is nicer. That might not be something that you need to prioritize, but in most cases, sort of those like developer needs are actually things that everybody needs, because if developers can't sort of move fast and sort of at high quality with their code base, that affects everyone, right? So that's something that is very important to me, sort of to make clear that like the developers' like perspective and needs, and designers' perspective and needs, and product product person's perspective and needs, they are all equal essentially, right? Because if you like negate one of those perspectives, you will run into problems for sure, right? So there's no like rule really where you can say you need to spend like 1/3 of your time on X or whatever. Like I said, depends on sort of the status of your product. Also, of course, depends on like market requirements. Like sometimes, of course, you might be in situations sort of where you like are in a like very challenging race for market share, and you need to sort of release feature X before a particular date, before your competitor does, so you get the next funding round or whatever. That can happen as well. And then it's obviously, it makes sense then to like worry about quality a bit less maybe, and spend a bit less time on like making sure that design is like flawless and sort of the code is in good shape. It depends. It's just the important thing is that it must be understood that like nobody is just like none of these members of your teams, like product design, engineering, and maybe others, sort of it's just only has the aim sort of to make their own life better. It's all is like all of these sort of perspectives are essential for a product's success, and sort of which of these perspectives gets a bit more weight at what time depends on many factors, essentially.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. Well, thank you very, very much, Marco. That's yeah, really insightful.
Thank you.
Survived the hardest part of the Q&A, so well done. But yeah, very, very good. So it's over tough act to follow for you, Yanni, but hopefully I've no doubt in my mind that you'll do a very, very good job. So yeah, we'll reconnect for the next Q&A after Yanni's presentation. A quickly reminder again that you guys, we do have a raffle this evening, so we're trying to raise a little bit of money for Movember. If we don't get enough donations this evening, what we might do is just extend that period of time a little bit longer, and I'll announce the winners on YouTube. Sorry, on LinkedIn. We're on YouTube. On LinkedIn. Over the next day or so. So we can always keep it going for a little bit longer, but if we get a couple of donations more tonight, we might be able to do it tonight. We'll see how things go. That's the nature of live streaming during a pandemic, I suppose. But over to Yanni now, and yeah, we'll catch up again for the Q&A after his presentation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Yannis Katsaros, and today I'd like to spend a bit of your time to talk to you about my experience in building a dashboard for clinical trials. Before we begin, I'd just like to say a big thanks to Product Circle and for inviting me, and I sincerely hope that you'll find the next 20 minutes or so useful. This is me. I've been working for Medi-Data for the last 2.5 years. I've been working in the broader product management area for the last 7 years, and before that I was involved more on the R&D side of software delivery and software design, but the overarching element was always medical technology. So I'm a big fan of this space, and I really enjoy working in it, and Medi-Data recently gave me the opportunity to have a bigger impact in my role. What I'm going to be talking to you guys today about is a bit about Medi-Data, although other people in the Product Circle events have spoken about the company before, so I won't take too much time speaking on that. Given the current circumstances, I'd like to speak to you a bit more about the clinical trial space overall and the way that clinical trials are conducted. And then the remaining of the presentation is the before and after, with the milestone being the time that a product team is happy with the business requirements they have. I always felt that this is a major milestone in the software design process, and I've sort of classified the life cycle in the before and after of this milestone. So A bit about Medi-Data. So Medi-Data is a global player in the clinical trial software, and a statistic that speaks well to that is the fact that about half of the clinical trials that are currently run across the globe are in one form or another aided by Medi-Data software, and we as Medi-Data employees are very proud of that statistic. Just to get ourselves on the same page before we begin, I'd like us to understand what a clinical trial is. This is a definition that I found online and I'm pretty happy with because it encapsulates the essence of a clinical trial. I'll let you read it, but the main perhaps takeaway from this and the number one priority on anyone working on a clinical trial is the safety of the patients involved. So I'll keep this other theme in the remaining of the presentation, but I also want to make sure that you guys understand that anybody working in the space has this as their number one priority. In a typical clinical trial, if we had to group stakeholders into 4 groups, these would be them. So at the top there in green, you've got the pharmaceuticals, the biotech companies, the medical device manufacturers that are sponsoring the trial. These are the people that have invented, let's say, the experimental treatment or operation, and they intend to market it and make it available to the general public. In their journey, they are helped by that by organizations that are dedicated to conducting clinical trials. These are called CROs, or contract research organizations, and they are companies that do just that on behalf of the sponsors. A very important stakeholder is also all the people, all the medical personnel that are working on the hospitals, clinics, GP practices, or sites are there, as they are referred to, where the trial takes place. So these are very important because they are the ones that have the majority of the interaction with the patients, are also primarily responsible for the safety of the patients that are enrolled in the trial. And of course, in the center of this ecosystem is the patients themselves. So they are the ones who need to be recruited in order for the trial to take place, and they are the ones that are very, very central to any clinical trial for various reasons. If you see it from a software perspective, the patient is essentially the main source of data, right? So the majority of the data that is captured during a clinical trial is coming from the patients, and that essentially affects how software is built. So just to give you a very, very brief overview of the whole life cycle of a drug from the moment that is investigated in a small laboratory until it reaches the market. In the beginning, you've got the phase of the trial where experiments are done in vitro, in laboratory, and in animals sometimes, and these usually take anything from 4 to 5 years. And investigators need to prove that the drug is safe to be administered to humans before they even embark on the phase 1 of the clinical trial. So on that first phase, their primary objective is the safety of the humans that are participating, and so they're making sure that in low doses the drug that is being administered is safe. These are, as I said, fairly small scale. They last anything up to a year, from a few months to a year. And in terms of their success rate, about 60% of those move on to phase 2. In phase 2, this is where the investigators, the team, starts looking at the efficacy. How effective is the drug in treating the condition or the disease? These take up to 2 years, and they are the ones that actually fail the most, right? So if you see at the statistics, only 30% of phase 2 trials progress to phase 3. Phase 3 now is the longest of the phases. This is where the investigators start looking at the details of the effects of the drug. So this is where they are trying to establish that a drug is more effective than anything else that's out there in the market. And in order to achieve that, they need larger numbers of patients. And as you imagine, this is why this takes the longest. So of phase 3 trials, about 60% are submitted to approval to one of the regulatory bodies that decide if a drug is to reach the market or not. And that itself is a fairly long process. So unlike the vaccines for COVID-19, where they went through special conditions in the FDA to expedite their approval, normally drugs are the sponsors have to wait for up to a year and a half before they get an approval by the regulator. Overall, about 1 in 10 drugs that embark on a clinical trial reach the market. So that gives you a sense of how expensive the whole process is for the stakeholders. In terms of the software itself, it's an easy way to break it down because there's a ton of tools out there. So an easy way to break it down is if you break down the software tools that are used in terms of the stage of the trial where they're being used for. So at the beginning, you've got your protocol design. The protocol is essentially the guideline of any clinical trial. It states the hypothesis and dictates how the study should be conducted. It determines the amount of patients that need to be recruited before efficacy can be established. So this is essentially the Bible of any clinical trial. Following that, you've got software that deals with the study startup. This is the part where the sponsor or the CRO needs to recruit sites and medical personnel to help them get involved in the trial before even the trial starts. And then you've got the patient recruitment software. So this is the software that makes sure that all patients understand the risks involved in participating in a clinical trial. This is the software that deals with randomization in the various cohorts, etc. Following that, you've got clinical operations, which is the software that I am personally dealing with the most, and this has to do with the monitoring and management of a clinical trial. So this has more to do with the let's say the management of the trial and the making sure that the quality is maintained during all aspects of the trial. And you've got dry supply logistics. So in scenarios where you've got a trial that is run across 100 or 120 different hospitals, there needs to be software to support the supply of hospitals with the drug, keeping track of any shortage, making sure that the drug itself is transported in the right conditions, all kinds of things that have to do with that. And lastly, and probably the biggest part of this ecosystem of software tools is all the software that has to do with the collection of patient data, right? So as we said earlier, the patients are the main data source for any clinical trial. So you might imagine that for a trial that has run for 5, 6, 7, even 9 or 10 years for more complex oncology studies, the amount of data that patients generate is enormous. So there's a lot of effort going into building software like that. Before we get to the business requirements, how we got there, I'll try to make this as generic as possible to be more relevant to the people in the audience. But this is what essentially we have done in order to get to our first set of business requirements. So it's all about asking the right questions, and it's asking them frequently. So a mistake that we made early on was that we satisfied ourselves with one answer to some of those questions, and then we never asked it again. And as you might imagine, this boomerangs back to you at some stage later on in the journey. So these are the questions that, in retrospect, I wouldn't do without. And also, these are the questions that you need to keep asking yourself if you want to make sure that you're building the right thing. Let's kick off with how we approach those questions. So first off, who do you ask, right? So we're selling primarily to businesses. So getting access to users isn't always easy. So what we did is we made sure that we asked the right questions at the right times and to the right people. And we also utilized people in our own company that have better understanding of the industry. We refer to them as our subject matter experts, and we made sure that any major questions were addressed to them before we took them to our customers. That helped us get that early feedback, and that also helped us get that frequent feedback as well, right? Because you can't have customers in meetings every 2 weeks. It's simply impossible. What we also intended to do is to get as many people, be it customers or subject matter experts, as possible when we were asking those questions, right? So it was frequently the case where you had one person dominating the room, but with an opinion of their own. So we always had to make sure that every voice was heard when we were building. So if we move on to the questions themselves, first, and probably most obvious, is who are we designing for? Who is our user? So in the clinical trial space, we have several users. These are just a few examples. At the top there is the clinical research associate. These are the guys working mostly for contract research organizations that are making sure that the trial is run according to the protocol. So they are the people that have the working relationship with the medical team in every hospital. They visit them frequently to make sure that they address their needs, help them understand anything that the protocol demands that they might be trained on. Anything that has to do with the trial conduct, it's up to them to make sure that is running according to plan. Study managers are people who are in charge of the study overall. They're higher up in the hierarchy, and they need a much broader look of what's going on during the study. And then you've got biostatisticians, clinical staff in the sites that are participating in the study, and of course patients, right? So there are software tools of ours that are addressed to patients specifically. For the dashboard, we initially focused on the CRAs, right? So it made sense because these were the users that were closer to us, and also it was a good starting point because these guys interact with a fairly large range of the clinical trial software. So they don't. Maybe a biostatistician, for example, would focus more on any statistics or data analytics tool, but the CRAs need that broader understanding of a clinical trial. So we thought they were a good user to start with. As I said, in terms of their day-to-day, they are the people that interact with their clinical staff, and they are regularly on site conducting visit and ensuring quality and compliance. And their focus is primarily on data quality, data accuracy, and correct trial conduct. It's also interesting because they have little interaction with patients. Any information that they get from patients, they get either from the software or from the clinical team. So what is the problem we are solving, right? Do our users need a dashboard? And we felt like they did. As I said, they are exposed to many different sources of information from various different systems. So they use too many software tools, and they also have too many competing priorities. So a typical CRA might be looking after 20 or 30 participating sites in a clinical trial. So apart from spending a large part of their time in cars or airplanes, they also need to make sure that each site visit is is utilized to the extreme, right? So they don't have a lot of time to spare, and they also need to understand fairly quickly what their priorities are on any given day. Moving on to the sort of restrictions that we have before we even start building, or before we even get to a first set of requirements. For the dashboard, we had about 6 months to build. We obviously had a fixed budget. We had one team available to us, but more importantly, we had a fixed set of guidelines in terms of our UI and UX. And we also, had a strict requirement in terms of technology, right? We build enterprise software, so we can't just go shopping around to the sexiest technology that is out there before we take it through quite a strict process of qualification. So to establish that, you have to understand that we have to speak to a lot of internal stakeholders, architects, UX experts, you name it. So establishing where we are in terms of our technology starting point was not an easy task. What about the competition, right? So you have to look out there before you set a benchmark for yourself. So apart from the obvious sources of anything that's available in the public domain, I think it's really important to reach out to sales and look at RFPs. Because obviously RFPs are not a direct access to competition information, but it gives you a sense of what's out there. So especially for B2B companies that are looking for quality competition insights, RFPs are a good source of information. And the customers themselves, right? So salespeople tend to talk to customers a lot, and luckily enough, there are customers who are very vocal in expressing their opinions with respect to competitors. So it might be difficult to listen to that feedback, but it's so important to open your eyes and make sure that you bring it in and factor it in any design decisions. What about the long term, right? So what do we want our software to look like in 5 years' time? We obviously want it to be scalable, especially in an ecosystem like the Medi-Data ecosystem, where we have 25, 30 products. We need it to be as scalable as possible. We need it to be supported by good technology, so that we don't just create tech debt for ourselves while we're building new tools. And we need it to be configurable. So for a dashboard, imagine that not just a clinical trials dashboard, but any dashboard, the users could be coming from any different background. Their job roles could be literally anything. So a mistake that we did in the beginning is that we started looking at a specific user archetype. We said, let's look at the CRA, which it wasn't necessarily a bad decision, but what we didn't do at that time is we didn't keep configurability at the back of our head. So we said, let's look at this user now, that user in the next release, the third user in the fourth, etc. But what we should have done is to look at how we could make the dashboard more configurable. And we eventually did, but this is one of the design decisions that I wish I could have done earlier. And lastly, development democratization. So what I mean by that is that if you imagine the dashboard is able to surface information from 10 different downstream products in 3 years' time, that would essentially sort of increase the need for resources that we would have as the dashboard application grew. So what we thought early on is that let's make it configurable enough and modular enough so that each team that wants to surface data on the dashboard can build their own dashboard component, and you'll see what that looks like in a minute. Are there any similar efforts in place, right? So nobody is happy if you step on their toes. So we need to make sure that there weren't any similar efforts out there. And guess what, right? There were. So there was no shortcut in the way that we could reuse, learn from, or as a worst case, discard what's was already out there. So we had to go through a rigorous analysis of what was out there and reuse whatever we could. And finally, and probably most importantly, you always need to keep at the back of your mind what you're not building. So it's very easy to overwhelm yourself with scope. It's very easy to try and build a Swiss knife that does everything. And it's also very easy to duplicate functionality, especially in a company that has tools that are all in the same domain. And it's needless to say that it goes against human nature to try to complement, to try to prioritize, and to try to focus on what you think will have the most impact moving forward. So all those questions answered, this is what we ended up with, right? We wanted a single centralized location for all this data to be available in. We wanted our users to quickly establish their priorities and be able to drill down in the details. We wanted them to have a single place where they could just see key metrics about the stuff that they're interested in. We wanted the application to be signposting to other applications, right? We don't want them to spend too much time on the dashboard. We just want them to understand where they need to be going next. And we wanted them to provide the ability to do so very quickly. We've wanted it to be configurable. And of course, we wanted it to be scalable. So having a basic set of business requirements, how did we move on from there? We went to UX, and the designers were very quick to jump on board and throw some mockups together. And funny as it may look, this is what they came up in one afternoon. And I cannot stress enough the importance of this little paper mockup here, right? In a matter of hours, we went from something that was just a bunch of bullet points in a presentation and an idea in a few people's heads onto something that we could actually look at. And this was a huge milestone in the process. And not only that, but it also helped us facilitate some of the more detailed conversations, right? We already knew that we were going to surfacing data based on business domains, and each widget or each little card on this paper mockup was its own entity, let's say. We could even discuss navigation because the navigational aspects are there, and even the data visualization elements, right? So once again, very important part in the journey. So that paper mockup quickly evolved into a lo-fi wireframe, and this is where we could start engaging more stakeholders in the discussions, and this also fed into the higher quality mockups, and there they are. Again, this is what we can now use for our development. This can be facilitating the story mapping, as it did, and also these are of the certain quality that you would go to your customers with. So we started the customer conversations with them. having the mockups in place, we could now start the detailed analysis. So we started with 3 amigos sessions so that we don't take up the entire team's time. We put together some high-level stories and we sized them to get a feel of the effort required. We went through a first round of prioritization and scope refinement. Went on to put the stories in Jira. We took the entire team through them. We got the team level estimates, which were by far the most accurate estimate. Went again through a second round of prioritization and scope refinement. And finally, we could scope freeze, right? So especially for the clinical trials world, we need to be able to communicate what a release is going to include quite a few months back. So scope freezing early was important to us. Following that development process, this is what the end result looked like. Widgets from 4 downstream applications that are surfacing data on the dashboard. This is done via 5 independent widgets. We average about 2,000 to 2,500 page views a week, which is a good number given the age of the product and the fact that it's a business-to-business environment. And we are constantly adding applications and widgets, and we're also in the process of improving configurability so that users can have various different views. So as you can see, the elements of that paper mockup that was put together in a matter of hours are mostly there, and you'd be surprised at the similarities if we looked at into more detail. At the end of that process, if we had to go away with a few lessons learned, these would probably be them, right? So we spend a lot of time establishing our restrictions. So it would be good if we tried to level the playing field early on and made sure what we're building on and what our building components are. It's great if we could have focused on one persona. We did that mistake too. We focused on two user roles to begin with, and then scaled down to one, which made the whole conversation a lot easier. We visualized as soon as possible, right? So again, back to that paper mockup. This was a great a turning point in the whole process, and it helped facilitate a lot of the conversations afterwards. We did consult our users in the beginning. We could have done it more frequently, I suppose, but I think the takeaway was that, maybe a bit contrary to what Agile says, where you go to your users at a more or less equal frequency. I'm a big fan of asking users early on in the process. So the more iterations, the more feedback sessions you have with users early on, the better it is, in my opinion. Maybe more importantly, you need to keep a balance of 2 things in mind while designing. You need to have that long-term vision, where you think big, you think what the product could look like in 5 years' time, while at the same time having that ability to ruthlessly prioritize and try to maintain a fairly small scope for your MVP. And with that, I'd like to thank you, and I hope you find that session interesting.
That was great, Yanni. Thank you so much for taking the time to put that together. Really, really insightful, and obviously, super relevant to everything that's going on right now. I'm sure that lots of people, didn't know quite a lot of that stuff before, but it's good to see it from like that product perspective. Like I said, Marco, I think you wanted to start us off on the Q&A. I think we were kind of talking a little bit in the background about how it was quite interesting and relevant to everything. So did you have a kind of question around that?
Yeah, I do. First of all, very interesting talk there. It's like something that I think many people didn't know anything about, and now everybody is sort of interested in clinical studies and like them going as fast as possible, actually. I do have a question though. I guess like I mean, it's probably very important that the data you're collecting in these studies is correct, right? I guess like if there's some strange value for something for some patient or so, it could make them like look severely ill, and then that could bring this could bring the study to a halt maybe. Although like maybe it's just a typo, right? Do you have any sort of validations or like probability checking in place to sort of support the correctness of the data you're collecting?
Yeah, there are a lot of ways that this is done by software during clinical trials. So at its source, data is validated by the system themselves. So a simple example like the one that you gave, Marco, if I enter a blood pressure that is off the charts, that is immediately picked up by the software, and it's validated so that the software itself can tell you, hang on, there's something wrong with this value. That's the automated part. And then the clinical research associates, like the guys that are looking after all the sites, are doing what we call source data verification. So after the machine hands over to a human, then there's a pair of human eyes that is actually responsible for checking every single data entry before it goes into that, let's say, big pool of data that is then fed into the FDA. And also, you've got your statistics as well, right? So if you've got enough data captured, then there are other tools that say, oh, hang on, there's a bit of an outlier there. That doesn't look quite right. So yeah, there's a few ways that data is being checked before it's submitted to the regulatory body.
I see.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Yannis. So I had a question here that actually came through from Alex, who works alongside us. And that was, it would be interesting to understand how you could expedite the process effectively and what methods might have been used for that, and if that potentially sets new precedent for future clinical trials.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the COVID vaccines are a great example of that, right? So there are a lot of factors. I mean, the number one probably source of delay is the enrollment of patients, right? The people that qualify to participate in that trial and are willing to take the risk of an experimental drug, right? Before a drug is being released into the market, it's still experimental. I mean, all the necessary checks have been taken before you actually administer to humans, right? But still, there's a degree of uncertainty. So I think that it's a combination of the publicity and the extent of the pandemic that helped with recruiting subjects very, very quickly. Of course, it's the fact that, you know, there's a lot of money thrown at it as well, right? So if you're a pharmaceutical and you're developing something that will solve the world's #1 problem, you throw a lot of money on it. There was huge investments in that. And then the third, from the regulatory aspects, these were all applications that were fast-tracked, right? So as you saw in that slide in the beginning, pharmaceuticals will probably have to wait for a year or a year and a half before they get an approval by the FDA or the MHRA here in the UK. Given the extent of the pandemic and the severity of recent events, these were expedited. I don't know about what factor, but you know, it definitely didn't take a year and a half as we all saw.
Yeah, definitely. And it'd be interesting to see, I suppose, how, well, hopefully nothing like this does ever happen again, but the learnings that will come from it in the future, you know, if there's any kind of investigation done into the handling of it in certain countries or anything like that, if there were certain patterns between the, I suppose, the use of the data and the kind of process that they'd gone through in terms of following the current process versus expediting it a little bit more, as you said. So.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think there's a single stakeholder that was involved in the process that didn't have a very big, you know, learning takeaway from all this. So yeah, big lessons learned.
For sure, for sure. And hopefully, you know, there's some processes that are implemented in the future in non-pandemic life, or potentially for other people in non-medical fields, that could potentially take some of those learnings and take it over to what they're working on, and find out different ways to be able to scale things just that little bit quicker, or get an MVP out just that little bit quicker without going through crossing every T and dotting every I, and getting something out there first, and then kind of, I suppose, obviously the implications in the medical industry are obviously slightly more, right? But to be able to take those learnings and implement it somewhere else might be quite important as well. Perfect. Well, look, I think that's pretty much it for the Q&A. So you managed to get away quite well. But what we'll do is we will share. I'll share my LinkedIn profile on the comments section as well. And if anyone who's not watching this live does have any questions for either Yanni or Marco, then feel free to drop a note to me, and I'll make sure that it gets into the right hands, and we'll try and, like I said, continue that conversation going as well. But yeah, Yanni, thank you so much for taking the time. It was a really great talk, and Marco, thank you as well. With the raffle, guys, I think what we're going to do is we might just continue that going. We might keep that open for a little bit longer, just because I know that there are, we can tell from the analytics, there are quite a few people who are watching this not live, so we wait for them to catch up, and we might keep that going. So please do connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll announce the winners of the raffle. We have had some really good donations throughout this meetup event, so thank you very, very much to those people. It's a good cause, so we'll make sure it goes into the right hands. But we'll announce the winners of the raffle, which will be drawn at random at some stage tomorrow on LinkedIn, and we'll tag the winners in a post on LinkedIn as well. So we'll make sure that we can get all of the prizes out to the right people. But for now, I think that kind of wraps us up for the evening tonight then, guys. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy diaries to put together the presentations, which I know isn't always easy at this time of the year, and also to find the time to present them for us as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
And if you are
interested, thanks for having me.
No worries at all. Thank you very much. So yeah, guys, if you are interested in sticking around, I think we're going to be dropping the link for the Netflix party as well to watch the Christmas movie. So yeah, I think we'll just be able to kind of kick back on there and relax, and just start getting into the festive spirit. So if anyone is interested, and you do need a Netflix login, like I said, so we'll put the details on there, migrate over to that different stream, and then we'll see you guys in the new year. So happy Christmas, everybody, and keep well, keep safe, and see you all very, very soon. But thank you, guys. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you. Happy Christmas all.